Hello AOS fans, it's me Pete, and I'm here to go through the new Sons of Velmorn deck from the new Gnarlwood Underworlds season. So here we go. First up is Thane, fourth and last, but in this case he's going to be first. He's got 3 move, 1 shield and 3 wounds, which isn't bad, and he's armed with a great white blade that does 2 swords, 2 damage, range 1 with the trip ability. The trip ability means if you roll a crit, you stagger the target, which isn't too bad. And he also has the ability of Sibling Rivalry, which is a reaction that after the final power step of the round, you can inspire one friendly fighter that has this ability. They pretty much all have that, which means you're going to be able to inspire at least one of them every turn, which isn't bad. He also has the Grave Guard keyword, which will be important in a little while, you'll see. And he inspires when an attack action results in a critical hit if this fighter was the attacker or supported the attacker, which also isn't too bad. Looking at his inspired stats, he retains a 3 move, 1 shield, 3 damage. His Great White Blade gains a sword to hit, and it retains the trip ability on a crit to stagger the target. But he also gains a Scything Great Blade attack, which is 3 swords and 1 damage. It is Scything, which means you can hit everybody around him, but also it has Grievous, which means on a crit it will do 2 damage instead of 1, which isn't too bad. After that we have Helmar the Hewer. He also has 3 move, 1 shield and 3 wounds. He has a white axe, which is 2 swords and only 1 damage, but it is Grievous, so on a crit he'll do 2 damage instead of 1. He also has the Sibling Rivalry reaction, and he inspires in the same way. On his crit side, his white axe goes to 3 swords and 2 damage. It gains cleave, which isn't bad, and on a crit he also gets shield up, which gives the fighter a guard token. So that's not too bad. Roll a crit and go on guard after your attack. Next up is Marshal Fulk Velmorn. He has the same move, wounds and shields, 3-1-3, and he has White Blade, which is 2 swords and 1 damage, which isn't fantastic, but it also has Grievous. On a crit he'll do an extra damage. He has the same Sibling Rivalry for an inspiration at the end of the round, and he also inspires in the same way. When he's inspired, his main stats, move, defense and wounds stay the same. His White Blade goes to 3 swords and 2 damage, so he loses the Grievous, but he also gets shield up, much like Helmar does, which means on a crit he will go on guard. And then we get to the big guy himself, Sir Jedran Falseborn, the illegitimate son of Velmorn and his personal bodyguard. He has a move of 3 and 1 shield again, but he has 5 wounds, so he's a chunky lad. His attack is 2 swords but does 3 damage. He inspires by either having an attack that he makes that has a crit in it, or by assisting someone. So again, he can inspire by helping others, but he doesn't get the same abilities as the others that he can automatically inspire at the end of a round, which is probably a good thing. When inspired, his move, defense and wounds all stay the same, so none of them go up to 2 shields so far. However, his Great Twin Blade goes to 2 hammers and 3 damage, which isn't too bad. He also gains the Slayer ability, which means you can reroll 1 dice in the attack roll of this fighter's attack actions that target a large fighter. He also has the Sleepless Sentinel ability, which means while this fighter is adjacent to a friendly fighter, this fighter supports that fighter, so you don't have to be adjacent to the person being attacked, you just have to be adjacent to the fighter making the attack, which is pretty good. Last up is King Morak himself. Again, he has a move of 3 and 1 shield defense, but he has 4 wounds. His Baleful Tomb Blade does 2 hammers and 2 damage and has Grievous, so on a crit he'll be doing 3 damage. He inspires the same way as the others by an attack having a crit in it, or supporting an attacker that rolls a crit. He also has the Deadly Command ability, which is a reaction. After this fighter's activation, give this fighter 1 command counter. While this fighter has 1 or more counters, it is supporting each friendly Grave Guard, even if he's nowhere near them, which is very handy to get him inspired. You clear these counters at the end of the phase, so you need to use them whenever you can. When Velmorn inspires, he stays at 3 move, but he gets 2 shields. His wounds stay at 4. His weapon goes to 2 hammers, 3 damage, and retains Grievous, which means he could be knocking out 4 damage, which is pretty nasty, and he retains the Deadly Command ability as he did before. So those are the fighter cards. Now it's time to move on to the main decks themselves, starting with the Ploys. First up is Deadly Maneuver. It's a reaction that you play during a friendly fighter's attack action after the declare attack action step. When you do, you can remove a command counter from the leader if he has one, then choose a friendly fighter other than the attacker and push the chosen fighter 1 hex, or up to 3 if you did remove a command counter. So you don't have to, but if you do, you can push them 3 hexes, which could be very good for shoving people up to support. Next up is Decapitating Blow. It's another reaction. You play this during a friendly fighter's attack action after the declare action step again. That attack action has Cleave. If that attack action results in a critical hit and takes the target out of action, you gain 1 additional spent glory, which is quite handy. Then we have Father's Pride. It's a reaction, placed after a friendly fight's successful attack action, so it's in a different point to the other 2 we've just seen. Give your leader 1 command counter and push your leader up to 1 hex, so quite handy for piling on those command counters onto your leader. We then have Imperious Will. You can give your leader 1 command counter and 1 guard token, both very handy. Then Redoubled Fervour. This is a reaction that you play after a friendly Graveguard's failed attack action. When you do, you can remove 1 command counter from your leader, and that Graveguard makes 1 attack action again. If you removed a command counter, you get +1 dice to the attack action until it has been resolved. So again, you don't have to play a command counter, but if you do, it makes it a little better. And then we have a leader-only ploy here, Rise Again. You can remove 1 command counter from your leader, and when you do, you place 1 friendly fighter that's out of action on a starting hex in your territory. You give that fighter 1 raise counter, and then give the fighter wounds counters until that fighter is vulnerable. It's not bad. If only there was a way to keep them alive. Well, there is Chasm Infusion. You can heal 2 to 1 friendly Graveguard, so if you haven't raised the big lad from the dead and you've raised one of the Graveguard instead, you can heal them for 2 wounds straight away. That's pretty tasty. Then there's Spike of Terror. Choose 1 enemy fighter within 2 hexes of 1 or more friendly fighters. That fighter's player picks 2 things. You can push the chosen fighter 1 hex, or stagger the chosen fighter, or give the chosen fighter a move token. So that's pretty nice to really stuff up your opponent's setup. And then Surprising Swiftness, +2 move to the first friendly fighter other than a large fighter to make a move action in the next activation. So you can't use it on the big lad again, but you can use it on any of the others. Very nice. Then you've got Velmorn's Curse, a reaction. Play this after an enemy fighter's attack action takes a friendly fighter out of action. If the fighter was adjacent to any other, deal 1 damage to the attacker. Another very Sepulchral Guardish card there. It's always nice to be able to do 3 damage to an opponent. And then we're on to the upgrades. The first one being the Crown's Curse. This gives your leader a reaction. After the first power step in a round, place 1 friendly Graveguard that is out of action on a starting hex in your territory. Give that fighter 1 raise counter, then give the fighter wound counters until that fighter is vulnerable. While the fighter has 1 or more command counters, you get +1 dice to this fighter's Baleful Tomb Blade, which is very nice. And this fighter is uninspired and cannot be inspired. So there's a bit of a double-edged sword there on this one, if you'll excuse the pun, but it's really handy to be able to keep bringing people back after the first power step in each round, which could be quite tasty if you can get this on early. We've then got Experience of Ages. This fights range 1 and range 2 attack actions have Ensnare. Could be handy. And you can reroll successes in the attack rolls of those attack actions. Why you'd want to reroll successes, I'm not sure, but maybe you might want to fish for a crit. Then we have Familial Bond. It's a reaction, and after this fighter's activation, you can push this fighter 1 hex towards the closest other friendly fighter. Quite handy to just shove people around after they attack, get them into position. We then have Favoured Son, +1 defense whilst your leader is surviving. It can only go on a Graveguard, so it can't go on the big lad because he's obviously not a Favoured Son. And the next is Fearless Lunge. You can reroll any number of dice in the attack roll. After this attack action, you stagger this fighter. 2 hammers and 2 damage, a range of 2. Not to be sniffed at there. Getting staggered afterwards could be a problem, but sometimes it's worth it for the range and the damage. Then have Fell Enchantments. It's a reaction again. After an enemy fighter's failed attack action that targeted this fighter, you give the attacker 1 curse counter. While a fighter has 1 or more curse counters, that fighter has -1 defense to a minimum of 1, and -1 dice from that fighter's attack actions to a minimum of 1. You clear all curse counters at the end of the phase. Could be handy. I'm not sure how handy it will be, but if you've got a fighter that's got lots of upgrades on them, it might be quite useful. The next is the Heirloom Weapon. +1 damage to the fighter's range 1 and 2 attacks. Nice and simple. A great strength, always pleasing to have, but it only goes on Graveguard, so it doesn't go on the big man or your leader. Lord of Bones is next. It's a reaction and it has to go on your leader. After this fight's deadly command reaction, push each friendly Graveguard up to 1 hex towards the enemy fighter closest to this fighter. So it's a reaction that comes off of a reaction, helps you shove all your fighters up when you need to. Being able to shove them all 1 hex is really handy. Of course, again, it only shoves Graveguards and not the big lad, but still handy. We've got Praetorian. Another reaction. During an enemy fighter's attack action that targets your leader after the attack roll, push this fighter up to 3 hexes to a hex adjacent to the attacker. This fighter is now the target of that attack action. It has to go on Sir Jedran himself, but that's still a pretty handy one to have to make sure your leader doesn't take a blow. And finally, Proud Son. You can reroll 1 attack dice in the attack rolls for this fighter's range 1 attacks. Nice and handy there. So then we're on to the objectives. They have 6 Surge objectives, and I'm going to run through those first. The first is a Surge hybrid called Relentless Unity. You score this immediately after an attack action that targeted a supported friendly fighter and failed, or that was made by a supported friendly fighter and succeeded. So basically, if someone targets you and they had supports and they miss, or if you target someone else and you had supports and you win, then you get a glory. Very nice. Next is Regal Riposte. It's another Surge hybrid. Score immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action that takes an enemy fighter out of action if that friendly fighter has no charge tokens or the enemy fighter has one or more charge tokens. So basically when your opponent's doing all the charging and you just stand there and slap them about a bit, you get the glory. Next is Martial Lord, a surge card which is scored immediately after a friendly leader's attack action that takes the target out of action. Another card reminiscent of the Sepulchral Guard deck, and your leader's none too shabby either, so this should be an easy one to score. House Eternal, a surge, score this immediately after you give a friendly fighter a raise counter. Bring someone back from the dead, score a glory. Clinical Efficiency, it's a surge hybrid, which you score immediately after a friendly fighter's attack action that took the target out of action if that attack action dealt precisely enough damage to take the target out of action, or the attack action resulted in a crit. They do quite a range of damage across their cards, and obviously if you roll a crit then all is grand. It's another Season 1 2S card, very reminiscent of that era, but it's also a little bit challenging enough to make it worthwhile, and it's another glory. Then Absolute Monarch, a surge, which is scored immediately after an activation if a friendly leader is the only surviving leader. We've seen this multiple times in multiple other decks. This is a bit different in that it's a surge which is scored immediately after the enemy leader is killed, so it's maybe a bit better to have, but I'm not 100% sure this one's the best objective in the deck. Then we get Protected Inheritance, which is a dual card. You score in an end phase if your warband holds one or more objectives in your territory and two or more enemy fighters are out of action. So it's a pretty simple one, just chop people to pieces and stand on some objectives in your territory, and it gets you 2 glory. Nice. We then got Dispassionate Slaughter, score in an end phase if there are more enemy fighters out of action than there are surviving enemy fighters. Possibly a bit easier to do versus smaller warbands, but basically kill over half of the enemy and you get 2 glory. Thank you very much. Next is Hereditary Claims. It's a dual card that you score in an end phase if your warband holds 2 or more objectives and one or more of those objectives is not in your territory, so you're going to be wanting to put objectives just in your opponent's territory or in no man's land to be able to score this, and it's another 2 glory, so not a bad card. Again, it's very reminiscent of like Beast Grave era where you're standing on 2 objectives, got your 2 glory, but this time around it's a little bit tougher, so I think it's a little bit better overall balance. Then Inevitability itself, score this in an end phase if there are 1 or fewer surviving enemy fighters and there are 2 or more surviving friendly fighters. This one doesn't seem very easy to score. It's 3 glory, but it's almost Annihilation, so I think this should be a 5 glory card, not 3, but there you go. Next is Morbid Majesty. Score this in an end phase if 3 or more surviving friendly fighters are inspired. I'm not sure how easy that's going to be, but you can inspire somebody at the end of each round, and you've only got to roll crits to start inspiring people when you're supporting and stuff like that, so it's not necessarily the hardest thing in the world to do. You could score this very quickly, and it is 2 glory again. And then last, Vying for Favour, the only 1 glory end phase card that they have, which is scoring an end phase if each surviving friendly fighter has 1 or more move and or charge tokens. Now, unless one of you guys gets killed, you're not going to be able to score that the first round, but you know, in the 3rd round you might only have 1 or 2 fighters left, and this would be very easy to score them because there's no minimum on this. So those are the Sons of Velmorn. They've got some really great cards in there, I think, and the fights themselves aren't too bad either. I like some of the synergies in this deck. I think there's some really good fun to be had here, and I'm looking forward to busting them out on the table. Let me know what your favourite cards are. Do you think that they're overpowered, underpowered, or maybe just right? They help scratch that Sepulchral Guard itch that I've got. I should probably see a doctor about that one. But overall, I'm loving this warband, and I think they're going to be great. Don't forget to like, subscribe, ring that bell and do all that good stuff, and leave a comment below. It all really helps the channel, and we'll see you soon. Bye!